I was originally diagnosed with IBS-D. And then when I went back years later, when things really flared up again, I was basically dismissed by the original GI doc who did the full workup, right? And she was just like, it's IBS. That's all this is. And she got very frustrated because I tried all the meds. Nothing was working. She didn't know what to tell me to do diet-wise other than see a nutritionist, which of course, where was I going to go in my community at the time? So, but then, a few more years went by and I finally was just like, something's really not right. I want to get this looked at again. And they did a colonoscopy and they're like, oh, you now have microscopic colitis. And
welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. I'm your host, Lee Brandon. This work started for me several decades ago when I started to see the impact I could make on people, helping them to identify the root cause of their health problems that no doctor could figure out, including serious back, knee, shoulder and neck injuries, acne and eczema issues, severe gut health problems, even helping couples get pregnant after several IVF treatments had failed. And it really moves me to be able to help people in this way. And that is why I do what I do and why we have this show. Welcome back to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. In today's episode, we're diving into gut health with functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, Courtney Cowie. We often hear about gut healing protocols, restrictive diets, and supplement regimes, but what if the reasons you're still struggling is that gut healing isn't a one-size-fits-all approach? In this conversation, Courtney shares her own gut health journey, the gaps in the conventional medical approach, and how to truly get to the root cause of gut issues instead of just managing symptoms. If you've ever felt frustrated with mainstream gut health solutions that doesn't seem to work for you, this episode is packed with valuable insights to help you find the missing piece in your health journey. So let's get into it. Courtney Cowie, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for coming on the show.
hey, I'm so glad to be here. I'm really excited.
It's good to have you here, Courtney. And to kick things off, could you share a little bit about your own background, including your journey with gut health? And can you walk us through some of the pivotal moments that shaped your path towards becoming a functional nutrition practitioner?
Yeah, absolutely. So my story with gut health actually goes all the way back to childhood. I was a kid that would come home from school at least a couple times a week. I had terrible stomach pain. I'd end up laying down on the couch, putting a pillow under my stomach. I'd have to lay there for like 20, 30 minutes and then that pain would go away. And then I'd get up and kind of be okay. And I think back at that time in my life, like this was kind of normalized for me. Like I had three brothers and none of them had those types of symptoms. My parents didn't really think anything was amiss, but I do remember like here and there, like we would go on family vacations, usually once or twice a year. And, being like out in California, visiting family in San Francisco, and we'd be out and about, and I would get these terrible stomach aches, and it was annoying to my parents. Like my mom would be like, "Well, this isn't the time to be having a stomach ache. Like we can't do anything about this now." So it kind of was treated as like almost a little bit of like, "This is annoying. This is a disruption." I think my parents always assumed it would go away because it did, but it wasn't really thought of as being abnormal by any stretch. And my family kind of way of looking at health is like, you'd only go to the doctor if there's something really seriously wrong. So otherwise, I was a pretty healthy kid. And so as I got older, the stomach aches continued to happen, I'd say all the way through my teenage years into my 20s. And as I approached kind of college years, especially, I'd always been a really active kid. I grew up doing swim team. I played soccer most of the way through high school. And then when I got to college, I ended up transitioning into lightweight rowing because that was a walk-on sport where I went to school. I knew I wasn't going to make the swim team at the school I went to. It's really large. I was at UW-Madison. And so I thought, well, this is good. I will try this sport. And it was a very intense program. I mean, it was Big Ten collegiate rowing, very competitive. I trained hard. There was this culture of kind of under eating because it was a lightweight rowing program. So all of the women on the team had to make a weight of 130 pounds or less. And of course, they varied in, body composition and height and stuff. And so there was a lot of just disordered eating going on. And I think that psychology kind of was shared amongst the team to a certain extent. And I remember kind of getting into this phase of, intense exercise training alongside my teammates and also doing a little bit of the under eating, controlling food portions thing that they were doing. Although to be honest with you, I was a smaller frame woman. I probably could have been a coxswain. I didn't need to do that, but it put a huge stress load on my body. And I think that then carried into an interest in triathlons. I did a little bit of like long distance running, marathoning, all the way through to my mid to late 20s. And all of that, I think, really um, shut down my body's ability to like generate energy well, certainly was like harmful on the digestive system and just furthered the whole GI stuff I'd had from childhood. And so as this was all going on, I was starting to develop bouts of loose stool that were happening like intermittently. And so in the very beginning, I remember experimenting with my diet. And I should mention the other thing that I had chosen to do as a teenager, which was not the smartest move looking back, was I went vegetarian for about a decade in high school. And then I'll kind of tell the story of how I got out of that. But I think that too was an additional stressor that kind of set the stage for a lot of GI dysfunction. But
Mm.
yeah, I got to this point where I was trying to just toy with my diet, figure out, okay, like what can I do to manage this like loose stool thing that's happening kind of intermittently. I remember trying like a raw foods diet at one point, Lee. It was awful. I mean,
Mm.
I would get out of bed in the morning and instantly run to the toilet a couple times. And I was like, okay, this is scary. I'm not going to do that anymore. Let's not do that. Like, I clearly need to eat more cooked food. So I was doing a lot of just kind of self experimentation. I'd have periods where things were okay, and then it would kind of like regress, and I couldn't really figure out what was really causing it. And then during those like years when I was in undergraduate and graduate school, I had an interest in Japan. I had studied abroad for 1 year as an undergraduate and loved it. And so I ended up going back several more times. And so when I was over there, my last year as a graduate student, I was working a job. It was like almost like a third shift part time job, trying to really refine my Japanese language skills. I was really interested in kind of just getting right in there with, you know, regular Japanese people working alongside. So I was working this job. It was a fun job in a little restaurant in downtown Tokyo, but the shift was like 10 p.m. to like 3 a.m., which was not the type of hours I would keep, right? Like ever in my life. And so after several weeks of that, I was noticing I was having trouble kind of like getting up in the morning, getting my head on straight. And then one day I woke up and I thought I kind of had my bearings, and I actually ended up passing out for the first time in my life. And of course, mind you, I was still a vegetarian, all the things, still running, still training really hard, not necessarily to be on a team, but just on my own to maintain like an exercise routine. And so what ended up happening was I had a good Japanese friend. She referred me to go see a Chinese herbalist actually that she worked with. And she's like, you need to see this lady. She's going to help you. I went in, I sat down. I was pretty blown away by the questions she was asking me. They seemed very different than what a doctor would. I had never had that experience outside of a traditional medical setting. She wanted to look at my tongue. She wanted to feel my pulses. She even like pressed into the front of my leg, you know, against my shin bone. And she's like, oh, I see some swelling. And, you know, this is kind of telling me this. And she basically said, here's the deal. I'm going to give you some herbal formulas, but I want you to start eating meat again. Like it has to be in your diet. You don't have to eat great amounts of it, but just start small. And if you just get it in 2, 3 times a week. And I was like, I'll do whatever you say, because I was desperate. I was not feeling well. And so I ended up going home with those formulas, adding hot water, drinking these herbal medicines. And honest to God, I started to see some positive change. And that just blew me away because I had never experienced that type of thing outside of just taking drugs to try to treat symptoms. And so I was really hooked. And then, of course, I started eating the meat again, too. And so, interestingly, it was that Chinese medicine encounter and experience that got me really interested in natural, holistic approaches to healing. And so that actually led me into becoming a Chinese medicine based body worker. This was a few years later. That was kind of my first entryway into holistic health and trying to help others with their health. And then that again kind of graduated into more of an interest in nutrition and functional health approaches, mostly because my GI stuff actually came back after I got back from Japan. I went through kind of some real major stressors. It was like a divorce. I had my first child. I was a newly single mom. I was building my bodywork practice, lots of background stressors going on, which again, I think played a major role. And the same gut issues came back, but they came back with a vengeance. believe I was like in my early 30s at this point, just woke up one day. It felt like running to the bathroom all the time. And this went on day after day. And in the beginning, I told myself, this is just temporary. It was probably something bad I ate. It'll get better because it usually does. Well, it didn't, Lee. And so
Right.
that's what started me down the path, and I did in the very beginning go to a local nutrition facility, brick and mortar, to get help. All they did for me was the LCAT food sensitivity test. I know that's
Mhm.
probably one that you've heard of and are familiar with. And of course, a ton of foods came back, right? And I thought that would be the ticket. It's like just follow the green zone foods, just eat those and avoid the yellow and reds, and everything will get better. Well, to my surprise and to their surprise, it didn't. And so that was interesting because, I remember going in probably a good 3, 4 months. And I think there became this point of frustration where, they probably didn't know what to do because their whole methodology was based on just the LCAT as their primary tool. And I'm like, look, I'm doing everything you're telling me to do. I'm literally eating all these foods. Things aren't getting better. And so that kind of led to the next practitioner. And I felt like every practitioner I saw who was functionally trained gave me a piece, but nobody was really getting the whole picture, right? And
Mm.
so that really inspired me to be like, okay, this is crazy. I'm going to have to figure this out. I'm intelligent enough to figure this out. I'm going to just go get this education. And I've got this book of bodywork clients that may also benefit from this. So if I invest and make this choice, this could actually be another facet to my career path that would be really fulfilling. So that took me into exploring and then eventually enrolling in the Nutrition Therapy Association program to become a certified nutrition therapy practitioner. So for the first probably 4 to 5 years of my nutrition career, I worked with mostly like diet, doing a lot of food journal analysis. I was trained to do lingual neural testing where, clients would come in and I could put a nutrient or a supplement on their tongue and then check basically the tenderness of different reflex points on the body that innervate the nerves, kind of innervate the taste buds, and you can give information about what might be going on at a deeper level. And it did work well for a while, and then my case was complex. I still was I got to a place of stability based on diet change after that, and was doing good, but then things kind of would get bad again. And I was just like, something's missing. I don't have all the pieces to this puzzle. And I continued to go down the educational rabbit hole. I did, continuing ed on SIBO, got into that. And I think it was the SIBO Pro course I did with Alison Seebecker, where she
Mhm.
suggested that I start to look into maybe mold toxicity and Lyme disease as like some deeper layers to the puzzle. And then sure enough, went down that rabbit hole and they were there, right? Like that was part of my process the whole time. And of course, nobody had caught it. It was missed, right? And honestly, that was what led me to functional diagnostic nutrition because I knew that it would complement what I did really well with my training with the NTA. And it would give me the foundational training I would need to understand how to run functional testing and then become a really great launch pad to get into more and more testing and education and understanding from there. And so that was essentially how I got into my path to become kind of a holistic functional health practitioner in a nutshell.
Mm. Yeah, it's a great little story. Um, we were talking a little bit off air before we started recording, and I was saying that obviously I went through the functional diagnostic nutrition training as well. When did you kind of graduate from FDN?
Gosh, I have to think back on that. I think it was around 2020. I think it was like
Okay.
right around the COVID era. And that was another piece too. I realized as things were transitioning to more and more telework or telehealth that my nutrition practice was going to become more important because again, I had been leaning mostly on just my body work practice, which was great. But I had the thought, okay, if people are too afraid to come get work in person from me, how am I going to make a living? Right? Like if this
Uh,
happens again, and I'm also getting older. I can't take the numbers of people every week that I used to be able to in the beginning. So, and honestly, I love the work of working with people from more of that complex angle of let me help you put the missing pieces of the puzzle together. Let me help coach you to get the right elements in place for you to see holistic health change. Just that whole, thinking capacity that's needed as a nutritionist. I really love that. It's just such a different thing compared to body
uh,
work. So, that was where I really was, getting very much invested in, okay, I need to kind of change my nutrition practice model. In doing this FDN program, I can see how this would give me additional skills to make my offering more robust and then eventually evolve it to become more of a telehealth type of practice.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I went through a similar situation really in 2020. I was working predominantly from a facility in central London,
Hmm.
and I would probably say 80% of my income was from that facility. I was already doing most of my kind of nutrition and lifestyle functional medicine type work online.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, but as soon as we went into lockdown, and I thought, well, if governments can keep doing this, which obviously they did,
Hmm.
but during the first lockdown, I kept thinking, well, if governments are going to continue doing this, it's a little bit risky relying on a bricks and mortar business, right?
Hmm.
So, so I kind of made that decision pretty early on that I was going to do a lot more work online. I still do, exercise work and body work. But yeah, the predominant time I spend with clients is online now. Whereas it was probably 20% before. Now it's probably 80, 90% now.
For
But
sure.
in one way, it's a good thing because you can help a wider audience. You know,
Yes. Yeah.
and if you go back 20 years, someone would probably have to fly to see me, right? Which
Yeah.
I mean, people still do, but for nutrition and lifestyle, you don't really need to do that now because obviously we've got Zoom and other technologies where we just don't need to do that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I actually think there's advantages to doing it online, like just being able to, share your screen and put the tests up, right?
Yeah.
Like I find that so much easier than having someone who's sitting across from me and having to like turn my computer screen so they can see it. Or, if a client wants me to record the session where I'm explaining their test results, like absolutely
Mm,
happy to do that, right? And then they can go back and review that information. It's a living resource for them. And it gets ahead of any potential like questions like, "Well, what was that thing you were saying?" It's great to be able to do that with technology.
mm, yeah. Yeah. It is good. You know, I think most people find, let's say they go to a medical doctor or they go to someone like us, they have the session and they go home and they think, oh, what was that? What did they say?
Yeah.
What did that mean? And how many of those? And you know, so
Yeah.
yeah, that is quite an important part. And for you, the practitioner, if they've got that there as the resource, it's also probably going to save you time because they're not emailing you to say, "Oh, that thing. What was that you said?" So yeah, so
Yeah.
that's a good move.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think sometimes, like, prospective clients don't realize that. I think most of us, I think you would do this too, Lee, but, like, I take very detailed notes for them, and I've got, pre-built templates I'll work off and just edit to make it appropriate to what we talked about or the testing we ran together, and, man, they love that. When I go back and interview clients, like, what were some of the best value things you got from our work together? Like, what were the highest value nuggets you got out of it? Like, time and time again, people are like, your notes, and just having that document I could go back to, that resource, like, you just don't get that in the conventional system. You don't get that in even therapy, right? Like, I mean, it's great. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely one for taking notes.
Yeah. Yeah.
To be honest, I'd be lost without them, right?
I know.
If you're seeing, if you've got 20 clients on your books and you're seeing them every week, how are you going to remember everything if you haven't written it down,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Yes.
So moving on, so many of your clients, like this is what you've said to me before, they've faced frustrating or vague diagnoses like IBSD, which is irritable bowel syndrome with diarrhea,
Mhm.
and microscopic colitis. Why do you think that traditional medicine often falls short for people with chronic digestive issues? Amanda spent 19 years battling severe IBS, diarrhea, and abdominal pain. Her life was ruled by public toilets, and she avoided holidays for fear of flare ups. Doctors offered no solutions, just endless Imodium. After working together, Amanda discovered the root causes of her symptoms, and in just 3 months, she was IBS free. She even booked her first holiday with her husband, a dream come true. If you're struggling like Amanda, visit www.bodycheck.co.uk to schedule your consultation. Let's find the root cause and get your life back.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually have done a bit of a episode on this whole topic of, whether we're talking IBS or forms of inflammatory bowel disease, are we really talking about two different things here? Or is it kind of just gut dysfunction on a spectrum of severity and inflammation, right? And so I personally feel like it's kind of one and the same, and we're just kind of seeing it across the spectrum. And I guess that's a part of my story too that I maybe didn't mention, Lee, is that in the very beginning, when I did go through the traditional system to try to get help with my own gut issues, I was originally diagnosed with IBS-D. And then when I went back years later, when things really flared up again, I was basically dismissed by the original GI doc who did the full workup, right? And she was just like, it's IBS. That's all this is. And she got very frustrated because I tried all the meds, nothing was working. She didn't know what to tell me to do diet wise other than see a nutritionist, which of course, where was I going to go in my community at the time? So, but then, a few more years went by and I finally was just like, something's really not right. I want to get this looked at again. And they did a colonoscopy and they're like, oh, you now have microscopic colitis. And I'm like, well, then it seems to me IBS can actually develop into a form of IBD in some people. So really we're kind of talking about a disease progression spectrum, but to kind of answer the question you're asking, I think the problem with conventional offerings for things like IBS, especially, is that there isn't any observable, obvious damage or criteria threshold that a doctor can be like, okay, this exact thing is wrong. The symptoms are there, but when they're doing their full workup, as they call it, and there's a number of tests they can do to really check this and check that and rule this and that out or in, right? But normally, most people are going to get an upper endoscopy, lower colonoscopy. There's other, barium swallow things they can do as well. But if all that checks out, and then you're just kind of left with, well, we didn't find anything wrong, basically your options are to take a drug. Often a GI doc will just suggest something like fiber or probiotic. I've certainly had that suggested in my case a number of times too. But again, depending on what's really going on beneath the surface, some of those things can actually make the symptoms worse if there's no testing to really look deeper and see okay, what is going on with the beneficial bacteria in the gut? What can we see in terms of levels of populations or counts? Or, I guess nowadays, a lot of GI docs have now moved into the area of recognizing small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, or SIBO, as a big contributing factor to IBS. And a lot of them are willing to run lactulose breath tests, for example. And if they find something there, great, we can give rifaximin, which is the number one prescription to treat that, right? Or sometimes they'll just give it kind of proactively, I found too. If you go in and you're like, I've got diarrhea, well, you probably have SIBO. We'll just write you a script for rifaximin. Well, rifaximin may or may not work. There's a number of clients I've worked with who have had that diagnosis coming to me. They might have even run the lactulose breath test. We're seeing high levels of, say, hydrogen gases, and they're having diarrhea. And they've done rifaximin, and it can sometimes not work. People can be resistant to treatment that way. So then, what would you do if you were stuck in that camp and all you had at your disposal was a prescription medication, right? So there's that problem of what do you do when all of the conventional testing comes back normal? You're offered some kind of entry level basic tools like probiotics, fiber, and a prescription med. None of those are working well, or maybe they've worked a little bit and now the symptoms are coming back and the doctor really doesn't have much else to offer. You really are stuck, right? And then in the case of IBD, often, again, it's the same types of things, or you're adding in immunosuppressive drugs. And then that comes with the side effects of, okay, now we're modulating the immune system. This is probably going to increase your risk of more serious things because we don't have the immune system functioning the way it should. And the way we're going to address this problem with the damage going on, whether it's the colon or the small intestine or wherever in the GI system, is we're just going to block it. We're going to block it so that tissue damage doesn't continue. But there's always a trade-off. So I think where that leads a person is deep down, if they really feel like this isn't really getting to the root, and I understand this is kind of blocking things and maybe helping me a little bit, but I'm not okay with that. That was the thinking process I arrived at in my case, right? And I feel like a lot of clients who reach out to me, they're along those same lines. They're like, I don't want to have to take a med. I don't want to have to just band-aid this, and I'm not even sure if the band-aid is gonna work for me, right? They're almost like not even willing to go that route until they try something holistic and natural first. And
Um,
so that's where I feel like we can use our tools of more specialized testing that looks at different data points than a doctor's test would. It's going to give us data that, especially as functional diagnostic nutrition practitioners, we can correlate that back to the whole picture and the symptoms, see this case that makes sense, and then work with, in my opinion, safer, gentler interventions that are more herbally based or supplementally based that aren't going to be like these carpet bombs coming in like antibiotics and, disrupting everything in the gut, but can still over time help to support the body to get back to a good balance. So yeah, I think I answered that question. Hopefully.
mm, yeah, I mean, the first thing, talking about IBS, to me, IBS is a diagnosis used when the person doesn't know what's going on,
That's very true. Yes.
right?
Yeah.
It's because it's not really telling you anything,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
You might have certain symptoms and they're just putting a label on the symptoms, but they're not really you know, uncovering what the cause of that issue is.
Yes.
A friend of mine, he said that IBS is should be termed intestinal bullshit.
I like that.
um, yeah, so a guy called Dave Hompes, he wrote actually a really great book on H. pylori, but it's quite an accurate term, really,
Mhm.
because it's not really telling you anything. Like, just like a balanced diet, it's just a nonsensical term. Doesn't mean anything, right?
Mhm.
And what I find here in the UK, and I don't know how different it is in the US,
Mhm.
but the amount of times I've had someone come to see me, and you look at their history, you look at their symptoms, and you say, "Look, I think it'd be a really good idea if we run a stool test." And they'll say, "Oh, no, no, I did that with my GP and it come back absolutely fine." And you think, "Hmm." And sometimes there have been situations where I'm talking to a client, I've got their history, and they're going through their symptoms, and I'm thinking, "Okay, you've got 5 symptoms of a parasite infection."
Yeah.
You know, blotchy skin, itchy anus, weight loss, night sweats. They got their, the full Monty.
Yeah.
And a couple of times I've said to them, "Look, you may well have had a test done by your GP. I'll tell you what, do the test that I'm suggesting. If it comes back negative, I'll give you the money back." Right?
Yeah.
Every time I did that, it came back and they had a whole load of stuff going on that came out. Right? And I must admit, I don't always do that because it's a bit of a risky thing to do. Um, but you know, for me, it's just really frustrating that people don't get that kind of service that we do
Mhm.
when they go the medical route. And for some people, certainly in the UK, it might be their only option because obviously the medical services are taxpayer funded, right? So
Oh, okay.
so people think, well, medicine's free, right? Well, have a look at your tax bill. Right?
Yeah.
If you think it's free, right?
Yeah.
Nothing's free, right?
Exactly.
So people go and get their, you know, doctor to check it out. And
Yeah.
then, 4 or 5 years down the line, all of a sudden they're on 12 medications rather than one, right?
Mhm.
Because one medication's caused another problem, which, oh, yeah, well, we've got a drug for that. And then that causes another side effect. Oh, yeah, we've got a drug for that as well. And now all these are interacting,
Exactly.
right? And you're on this pharmaceutical merry-go-round that's very difficult to get off once you're on it.
Mhm.
So, I've certainly found by doing more specific testing,
Mhm.
which I think is kind of what you were alluding to,
Yep.
has really helped me kind of pin the tail on the donkey, so to speak.
Yes.
So you know what you're dealing with. We have a saying at the Czech Institute: without assessing, you're guessing, right? So when you were talking, people go in, they're diagnosed with IBS, which again tells us that doesn't really tell us anything, and they're just given fiber and probiotics and pharmaceuticals, well, that is guessing,
It is gasping. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You know, and someone once said, if the only tool you've got is a hammer, everything will look like a nail, right? So if the only thing you've got is a prescription pad, the only thing you're going to do is prescribe pharmaceuticals,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think it's really great that, people like us, we've got many tools in our toolbox.
Mhm.
And another thing, just to add to that, and I think it was Hippocrates said that you shouldn't treat the disease the person has. You should treat the person that has the disease,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Which again is what we're doing. We're helping the person. We're not treating the disease, right? And I'm sure when you're working with your clients, they're getting much better results than they were when they were working with a medical doctor.
Oh, for surely. Yeah. And I mean, I have found the same thing as you where I've had clients come to me. This is a very frequent conversation where they're like, I've already had a stool test done, or specific to H. pylori, because you kind of mentioned that in passing. Like, that's a classic example. I've been tested for H. pylori. And then I'll run one of the functional stool tests I do, and it's showed up, and sometimes in high amounts. And I'm like, this isn't a coincidence. If you're also telling me you have acid reflux, burping, fullness in the stomach, like these clues actually correlate. And so, yeah, it's just the whole, I think, misconception that the tests that doctors run are set up to get the type of data that's going to actually get them well. And I mean, this is a big rabbit hole we could go down, but another similar conversation I often have to have with clients is just recognize that the insurance system, at least here in the US, because there's still a cost to care, right? On some way, shape, or form. Usually it's you're having your premium getting taken out of your paycheck, and you have a deductible you have to meet, or a copay. There's still a cost to it, right? Like, they're gonna pay money every time they see a doctor and get a procedure done. And I would argue exorbitant of what we would charge when you actually do a cost by cost comparison.
Mm.
And that system, at the same time, they're charging you a lot, but the goal is not to get you well. The goal is to keep you, like you said, on that merry-go-round of pharmaceuticals and continuous doctors. Is because that's how insurance companies make money, at least here in the US, right?
Yeah.
They don't make money if people actually get well. And so it becomes this conundrum where if people can actually like logically get that, it's going to be costly to be on that merry-go-round and delude yourself that that's actually a cheaper way to solve your health issue than it actually is to just kind of, in a sense, buck it up and pay out of pocket to hire someone who can really help you solve this. Because once you get to that place of resolution, now it's not a problem. And from there, you're not going to invest the kinds of resources to solve the problem anymore, right? Like, that's the
Mhm.
way I try to explain it to people.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that's looking at it from a purely financial perspective, and that's
Yeah.
important, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
absolutely important.
Yeah.
But I think even more important is to look at it from a quality of life aspect,
Yeah. That
right?
too. Yes.
Because that, as I was alluding to, all pharmaceuticals have negative side effects, right?
Mhm.
They are toxic, right?
Yeah.
That's just the facts.
Yeah.
And you know, again, if I talk about the UK situation, again, because people don't feel like they're paying, but they are, right? Well, as long as they're paying tax and national insurance, they're paying for it.
Mhm.
But because their perception is it's free, to come to someone like us, they see that as expensive,
Yeah.
right? But when you look at it another way, if it means, you know, you can play with your kids, or you don't feel like going to sleep at 2 p.m. every afternoon, or, you haven't got the energy to do things that are fun in life, or you're
Mhm.
depressed, right?
Mhm.
Because your gut microbiome's all over the place,
Mhm.
or whatever it might be, I think it's important to understand that if you could have more of a helicopter view, yes, it's going to cost you more money, possibly, and it
Mhm.
might seem like it's a lot of money,
Mhm.
but is quality of life not worth it,
Yeah.
right? And I've seen people in my own personal life spiral downwards in terms of quality of life once they get on that pharmaceutical merry-go-round,
Yeah.
and And I guess the point is, it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
But what it does require is personal responsibility. And again, we were talking about that a little bit before we started recording. It is very easy to sit back and say, well, I'll just take a tablet, right? Rather than, okay, I'm going to go to bed a bit earlier and I'm going to eat better food and I'm going to do exercise every day and might go and, go and have a sauna once or twice a week or, do a cold plunge every morning or a cold shower or whatever it might be.
Hmm.
Those things, they're outside of the comfort zone for a lot of people.
Right.
Right. Whereas, I can just pop a few pills and everything's going to be sorted. Well, I know from the last 30 years of my life and my career, popping the pills hardly ever works.
Yeah.
Right. The only way people can get healthy is through their choices and their behaviors and their beliefs. Beliefs are quite important as well when it comes to your health. So your beliefs, your choices, your behaviors. Not a pill, not a scalpel, not an injection. They don't get you healthy. And I think maybe since 2021, people are starting to realize injections don't necessarily get you healthy, but that's a whole nother episode.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. But you hit on such a great point, Lee. Like it really is about valuing your quality of life, whether that's time lost because you're not functional because you're feeling so unwell, opportunities missed to be with your friends and family, hobbies and activities you can't participate. I mean, the average person doesn't really sit down and put a literal cost to that, right? And I think that's a really great just kind of exercise to do if you're in a position where you're on the fence about where do I go now? I'm not getting the answers I want from my doctor. I'm struggling with my health, but I don't know if I want to invest in solving this problem on my own, right? Like you have to really give a value to all those other things as well.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. Just a few weeks ago, actually, um, I won't say exactly who it was, but a family member of mine had, let's just say, a bad health incident, and it was gut related, and they were rushed to hospital. And when we first got there, and finally got seen by a consultant, and took the history, and they said, "Well, sounds like you've got diverticulitis." Okay,
Mm.
okay, fair enough. It's not very nice,
Yeah.
but okay. But she said, "Look, want to do a CT scan, and then we'll take it further." So many hours later, did the CT scan, and eventually the diagnosis was colitis. Right now, we didn't have the diagnosis earlier on, and it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, and this person's saying to me, "I'm really hungry. I'm really hungry." And I'm thinking, well, if you eat something, it's probably going to irritate the gut again, and you're probably going to have to rush to the toilet again,
Yeah.
right? And this person said, "What do you think?" So I said, "Probably not a good idea, but apparently the doctor's going to come and see you soon. Let's ask the doctor, right?"
Yeah.
So in the meantime, someone come round from the hospital and said, "Oh, would you like something to eat?" And this person decided a cheese sandwich. So with low fat spread, not butter. Anyway, so they put the sandwich to the side and said, "Well, I won't eat it. I'll wait till the doctor comes around and we can ask the doctor." Right now, I'm thinking eating that wouldn't be a good idea, right?
Right.
So we asked the doctor. Doctor says, "Oh yeah, should be fine. No problem." So the doctor goes away, and they said to me, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, I don't think it'd be a good idea, but if you want to try a little bit, if you're that hungry, try a little bit and see how you feel." So they had half the sandwich, and 20 minutes later, they said, "I feel fine. So I'll have the other half." I said, "Okay." So they have the other half, and 10 minutes later, they're rushing to the toilet. And I wanted to say, "I told you so," but I didn't, you know? And it just sums up that, I'm sure if you'd have been in the same situation, if someone had said to you, at that point, it was potentially diverticulitis, right?
Yeah.
If someone had said to you, should I be eating anything now? I'm sure you probably would have had the same view as me, right? Probably not a good idea because you're probably just going to irritate the gut, especially if it's dairy, white bread,
Meat. Yeah,
and low fat spread, right?
exactly.
Seed oils. Um. So yeah, it was just I was just so frustrated by that. But
Oh,
you know,
yeah. Well, and it just goes to show too, like, this is a pretty typical approach I found is in the conventional system. I mean, I remember when I was going through, man, I probably saw a handful of GI doctors because you kind of get to a point with one, and sometimes it would actually get, I don't want to say combative, but antagonistic because they get frustrated, right, when they're not able
mm,
to help you. And I mean, I understand that as a practitioner now myself, it's a an understandable reaction because at heart of it, like, of course, we're in this work because we want to see people get results, but there's obviously limitations to what doctors can do, and they're trained very differently than, say, functional practitioners are trained. And so the truth is, they're not going to be able to help everybody. They're probably not going to be able to help a lot of people with the way the system's
mm,
set up. And so I would then, move to the next person because it was, ultimately it would end in kind of like a not so helpful negative experience. And I remember I got to this one GI doc. This was after my microscopic colitis diagnosis later, after the IBSD one, prior to that. And we're talking about the options. And she's like, yeah, the drug shown to work for this is budesonide. And the way we do this is we start you at a high dose. And it's kind of like you're going to take it for the next 12 weeks. And we slowly like decrease the dose. And, back then I was at least with it enough to be like, well, yeah, but it's a steroid. So how is, I can see how it's going to suppress the immune system and that might suppress the symptoms, but how is your weaning off? Is this going to help the body? Like, if the attack is still happening, wouldn't the symptoms come back? And I think I even asked her that question, but she's just like, she didn't have a great answer, but she's like, yeah,
mm,
as far as your diet goes, I think you should just eat whatever the heck you want. Just take the drug and eat whatever the heck you want. And I was like, my jaw dropped, Lee. I was like, are we on the same planet right now? But I wasn't gonna, argue with her because I knew that was not gonna be productive. But I was like,
mm,
okay, like I got a bit left, but I was like, oh God, like if this is the typical experience people are having, they're either super frustrated or really confused as to what they can do to help themselves because none of this feels empowering. Like none of this feels like anything at all that you're eating or doing with your life is connected to the symptoms, which is just crazy to me, right? Because we know there's absolutely a connection with the food we eat. We know there's absolutely a connection with how much sleep we get, how much like, you know, rest and play we have in our lives and good social connection. All those things matter when it comes to chronic illness.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, it just reminded me actually of someone I worked with quite a few years ago now, and she had IBSD, right? But the most severe I've ever come across. So she had to live within walking distance of where she worked,
Oh,
and she had to take a route that wasn't direct because she had to take a route where there were public toilets along the way,
oh, wow.
right?
Yeah.
So she had almost constant diarrhea,
Mm,
right? I think she was 33 when she came to see me, if I remember right. And I think she'd had it since she was 18.
okay.
So she'd never been on holiday. She never went on honeymoon when she got married,
Mhm.
right? So her quality of life was awful.
Yeah.
And when she went to the doctor, the only thing they offered was Imodium, right?
Right.
So she'd go to the doctor and the doctor would say, right, okay, what you need to do is take Imodium. So she'd take Imodium and then it would help for a little bit and then it would just come back. So she'd go back to the doctor and they say, well, now take 2 Imodium. And then the same thing happened. They went back and they said, okay, now take 3. Now, when she came to see me, I think she was on 11 Imodium a day,
Oh my gosh. Wow.
right? Now, I've taken Imodium once in my life, right?
Yeah.
And the only reason I took it was I was on a course and I'd spent a lot of money and I must have had food poisoning or something on that day. And I remember thinking, I do not want to be sat in my hotel whilst the course is going on. So obviously I paid for the hotel, I paid for the course. I
Yeah.
thought I need to do something. So I took this Imodium. I didn't have another bowel movement for 2 weeks. So, so this lady comes to me. She's taking 11 Imodium a day, right? She's got no quality of life. And she says, "Do you think you can help me?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I probably can."
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was so simple. We start getting her food right.
Yeah.
We find out what food she's sensitive to.
Yeah.
We eliminate those foods. I run a stool test, and within about, I can't remember exactly, within a few weeks, she was completely fine,
Yeah.
right? And so she'd had maybe 15 years of extremely low quality of life. And within weeks, her life was completely transformed, right? A- And what was quite interesting, after several months of kind of feeling okay, she had a normal life. Her and her husband decided to fly to New York to have a honeymoon.
Oh, that's
Right.
hilarious. That's awesome, though.
So, so she's in New York and she's very careful because gluten was her main trigger. Right?
Yeah.
Surprise,
Not
surprise, surprise.
yeah.
Right. And she was in this hotel and I was having a meal and she ordered some fries. Right. And it all came back.
Not surprising, right?
Right. And I can't remember if she emailed me or called me or something from New York and told me. And I said, what were they cooked in?
Mhm.
And she's like, oil. I was like, right, okay. Well, that in itself could potentially cause inflammation, right? And I
Mhm.
said, what else were they cooking in the oil? Did you check? Like, were they cooking other gluten containing foods in the oil? And she's like, oh, I didn't think about that. So she went and asked them and they said, yeah, they were cooking all sorts in there.
Yeah.
So I said, well, you've been glutened, right?
Yep.
And so that was an important lesson for her. But, rather than, that went on for 15 years, within a day or two, she was fine again. And now she's got a normal life. And it was as simple as get the diet right, reduce or eliminate the foods that you're sensitive to.
Mhm.
And I can't remember exactly what we did. We did some stuff to help with the gut microbiome. It was really simple. And she'd lived all these years a terrible, I don't want to say a terrible life, but a very inconvenient life,
Yeah.
right? Where she couldn't just go off and do social things. As I said, she couldn't go on holiday. Um, I think she was probably very lucky. The company she worked for were very kind of, they really helped her. And, other companies would have probably fired her, because of what she couldn't do. Um, so it's very frustrating, isn't it, when you see someone going down that medical route and they're not getting the answers, and their standard of living is really poor, and it could be someone that's got tons of money, but they've still got a poor quality of life.
Mhm.
When actually, if you do the right assessment and you find out what's causing it and you eliminate the cause, it can turn around very, very quickly.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I had a client not quite as desperate as yours, but similar last fall I worked with who was willing to actually try eliminating a number of foods, but wheat is always usually the place I recommend clients start. And she was
Mm.
really game for it. And um, she kind of found through self experimentation because she had uh, some kids that were busy and they were doing a lot of just running around with those activities. And so she had moments where she wasn't perfect, but I think she had done enough gluten avoidance that when she would get gluten, she's like, oh my gosh, it's the wheat. It is the wheat. It has been the wheat all along. And I was like, yay, now we've got some definitive data, right? And so she self reinforced just how important that was then as a probable lifelong, just dietary habit she was going to have to maintain just to keep her gut working really well. And I was so pleased that that was kind of the main trigger for her as well, because, depending on who we might be working with, sometimes the gut can get to such a state that it can be other foods as well.
Mm.
And that can be like a whole nother process. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing how sometimes it is just that simple. Like you start in a very logical foundational place and especially if the client's like more than willing to try, taking one of the worst food triggers out and then they see improvement pretty quickly, it's like they're sold. Like, you don't, it's like your eyes are open and you're never going to go back to the way it was. Right.
Uh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, so we've been talking quite a bit about root causes. Now you've got a program called Tame Your Gut.
Yes.
Can you perhaps talk a little bit more about root cause testing, kind of what it is and how it helps, clients identify the real source of their symptoms? Did you know that 92% of people fail to follow through on their New Year's resolutions? That's right. Year after year, most of us start strong and then lose momentum by February. Sound familiar? But what if this year could be different? What if you finally had the tools to make your goals stick? Introducing Stickability, a simple, effective, and affordable program designed to help you overcome the cycle of failed resolutions. In just a short time, you'll learn how to create lasting habits without wasting hours or breaking the bank. This isn't just another plan. It's the solution to finally sticking to your healthy lifestyle goals. Don't let this year be like the last. Head over to stickabilitycourse.com now to enroll. It's affordable, easy to follow, and packed with tools to make 2025 the year that you have the ability to make it stick.
Yeah, absolutely. So the approach I take with the root cause testing in my program is pretty individualized in that, especially being a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, we have a lot of different potential root cause tests we could choose from that give us different data points that we can help rule in or rule out possibilities that we can see that link with symptoms in clients. And so, the way I kind of assess my clients in the beginning is, some of it is just subjective assessment, like, okay, how are you rating these symptoms? I use a tool called the Nutrition Assessment Questionnaire, which actually goes back to my nutrition therapy days, and then also asks a lot of questions about just their home. What do they know about the age of their home? Stress points or stress levels, their relationships, just a lot of kind of like whole person centric data to form a really good impression as to what I think might be some possible root cause things driving the whole symptom picture. And I will say, because I serve mostly people with gut issues, whether that's IBS or something more serious like on the IBD spectrum, we're always going to do a really good stool test, right? And of course, different than what the doctor would run, as we were kind of talking about earlier. So that's kind of like non negotiable, always one of the tests I run on all of my gut clients. Now, beyond that, it can kind of vary depending on the other components of what's going on with them. So in certain cases, I might want to actually look at different hormone balances that might be related to having, stress levels that are not in balance, right? I'm going to use very simple terms here, so it's hopefully pretty understandable. But, we can actually look at stress hormone profiles through certain testing. We can look at sex hormone profiles that can give us a lot of information about the health of the nervous system and, also a little bit of insight into maybe what might be going on with the immune system, because we know if the immune system's out of whack, we're often going to see stress hormones out of whack as well and sex hormones out of whack. I will sometimes look at thyroid as well, because that can actually secondarily either get impacted by longstanding gut issues, especially if there's absorption issues or problems with, say, like liver function. The liver is where, thyroid hormone needs to convert into its active form. And so if thyroid gets out of whack, either typically what we see is, thyroid function kind of going down. We call that hypothyroid, right? Or functioning low thyroid function. That can impact, not only just how well can that person make digestive fluids like stomach acid and enzymes, but also the motility through the gut, which of course can be directly correlated with different gut symptoms, whether that's diarrhea, constipation, right? So that's a big piece of it in certain cases. Other testing I will sometimes do will look at uh, energy production in the cells or even metabolic function, toxicities, right? Like that is, I'm finding just more and more a background piece to a lot of clients, especially the clients that may have worked with another functionally trained practitioner before who's done some foundational work, or they've been working really hard on their diet. And I'm looking at what they're eating and I'm like, you're not in too bad a place. We can make some adjustments and improve this more. But, I'm getting the sense that there could actually be a toxic load that could be driving some of what's going on with the gut. So there's special testing that, I can do to kind of confirm, like, are we seeing signs of, high toxin metabolites coming out? Usually it's like urine testing we're going to use to check that. Um, so I would say, like, in general, those are kind of the suites of tests that I'm looking at for the gut health camp. But always, we're going to be looking at the gut itself through a stool test just to get a sense of how is digestion working? Are we seeing any issues where, this person may or may not be breaking down their food well, and that could be a contributing factor? Are we seeing problems with, balance of the bacteria, good or bad, in the gut that we might need to address? Are we seeing other bad gut bugs that shouldn't be there that are showing up? Are we seeing, any signs of immune dysregulation, which we can get from stool testing?
Uh,
Um, are we seeing signs of, oh, I forgot to mention wheat exposure? I don't always do a lot of food sensitivity testing in my practice simply because I really got good at helping clients from, a nutrient density improvement as well as just elimination diet use standpoint as a nutrition therapy practitioner. Like, having that strong background in just teaching clients, like, how to eat in a way that incorporates whole foods, and then, taking the biggest food triggers out that tend to aggravate the gut. A lot of times I have a lot of good success with that. But in certain cases, if I'm working with clients that need to see that black and white evidence, like, they just need to know
uh,
wheat is a problem for them, we could run a special test. The one I like to run is called the wheat zoomer, which looks at sensitivity at a very specific kind of level that can give us very specific feedback. And I've also found it helpful in cases where we might just want to check to make sure that they're accurately and successfully avoiding wheat. Like, they think they're doing it, they think they've been doing it for a long time. But I might suspect, based on what they're describing about the dietary habits of the other members in their household, or this is a person who goes out to eat frequently, kind of like you mentioned your client you worked with who got gluten when she went on her honeymoon, rightly? Like,
uh,
that can happen
uh,
very frequently, if not every time a person goes out to eat. And if someone's been going out to eat a lot and then they say, but I eat gluten free or wheat free at home, I still have a very healthy suspicion they're getting gluten frequently, whether they know it or not. And so
uh,
we can run that type of test to kind of confirm that, and then use the results to really say, hey, we might really have to shore this up or take extra precautions. If you're going to go out to eat, you might have to make some more specific choices around where you go, or there's some specific things we can do to offset the microdosing of gluten you're getting. If you are eating from a shared kitchen with other gluten foods that are getting prepared on site at that restaurant. So I would say, in a nutshell, those are the tests that I tend to work with. And then I kind of cater it to each client's specific picture and how they're presenting, so that we can hopefully get data that will help us really understand the deeper triggers and problems going on without running the whole kitchen sink of testing on them at the same
uh,
time. Yeah,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, it comes back to, if you're not assessing, you're guessing, right? I
exactly.
mean, you can certainly, in most people, achieve massive improvements just by working on what we call the six foundations. So positive thinking, correct breathing, hydration, nutrition, movement, sleep,
Yeah.
right? Sleep slash circadian rhythm. But then in some people, they need more than that, right?
Mm.
And I would say most people that come to me, I always start with the foundations. I don't go beyond the foundations until they've got them nailed. And then once they've got all those in place, then we could start to look at other things, right?
Mhm. Yes.
Because in some instances, those foundations are enough. And I don't ever want a client to invest in a test that they don't need.
Hmm.
Right. I always try and keep testing to a minimum, supplementation to a minimum. At the end of the day, once someone gets healthy, they don't really need that stuff.
Exactly.
Right. But for some people, when they're first starting out, then, we often do need to know a little bit more. As we're taught to be health detectives, right?
Yes.
And when I'm working with someone, quite often I explain to them, you know, you need to look at me like a detective, right? And you and your life is the crime scene. And I just need to gather as much evidence as possible so I can find out who the culprit is
Yeah.
or the culprits. And then we can decide what to do with them. Um, which again is very different from the medical model, right? Oh, there's the
Right.
crime. There's the crime scene. We're just going to put a bomb in it. That's going to solve the problem, right?
No, I mean, I'm totally with you, Lee. Like we think alike in that. And I think because I was originally trained as a nutrition therapy practitioner, it was the foundations mostly. I mean, very diet heavy program. I mean, it was rooted in ancestral diets and we looked at the work of Weston A. Price, who was this holistic dentist that went around the world and looked at different populations with different native diets, but found unequivocally it didn't matter so much that they ate all the same things, but if they stuck with their native whole foods diet, they had impeccable dental health and whole body health, right? So, it definitely has this bio individuality component to it. But, you know, just that foundational piece alone, for sure, I was seeing great results with that with people. And it's interesting because sometimes I get clients that are big, just supplement like addicts. They go to the supplement store that's in the middle of town, and every month it's like, what can I try now to try this and try that? I've had clients come in with like, kid you not, bags of like 25 things, and they want to pull these bottles out in the consult we're doing and have me look at the stuff, and I'm just like, this is less important to me because at the end of the day, the goal is not to be on 25 things. Like, we're going to use things if we need to use things to correct what we find on testing. But ultimately, like, we're not going to out supplement a bad diet. Like, we have to look at your diet before we do any of that. And I think it kind of gets back to just like culturally. And again, because of the way the medical system is, people are just looking for this quick fix. It's like, well, this is better than a drug, so I'll just try this, right? It's this kind of like knee jerk thing, I think, that seems very tempting because, of course, if it was a quick silver bullet fix, who wouldn't want that, right?
Mm,
But that isn't the case. And I think it's these foundations, honestly, where people need the most help and support and coaching, right, to get those working well for them in support of their health. But they often underestimate how important those things are, as
mm.
part of coming to us. They don't necessarily recognize how important those things are.
Yeah, yeah. And I think not just how important those things are, but how effective they are as well.
Yeah.
Getting to bed earlier, well, surely that's too simple, right? But again, you know this, but the time you go to bed and the time you wake up has a massive effect on your hormonal system,
It does.
right? But we should wake up close to the time when the sun comes up, and we should really be going to sleep close to when the sun goes down.
Exactly.
But there's a lot of people that are almost the entire other way around,
Yeah.
right? And that has a massive effect, not just your hormonal system, but your nervous system as well.
For sure. Yeah, just getting that morning sunlight and that's why we're seeing like I think an explosion in like red light therapy and some of these
Mm,
adjunct things, these tools to ground, right? I mean, and I'm not saying those are bad. They can be great as an adjunct, but this is available to us naturally, right? Like we're adapted to be outside more. We're adapted
mm,
to get that morning sunlight in our eyes. And again, at dusk when the sun's coming down, we're adapted to walk barefoot on the ground, at least when it's not winter time, like it is here
mm.
for me and Yuli. But yeah, I mean, it's just we've gotten away from having that lifestyle that our ancestors did years ago, where they were more connected to the outdoor environment and to
Uh,
nature, because so many of our jobs also necessitate that we're indoors, we're seated under artificial lighting, right? And in Wi-Fi, crazy environments that, you know, people don't necessarily take that into account or believe that's a thing, but it's definitely not the way life was years ago. And you have to really question, like, is this really helpful for the human body to get bombarded by all of this different
mm.
frequency and radiation from all of these electronic gadgets that are constantly running in our homes and workplaces, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we are electromagnetic beings, and why would a unnatural or what was now kind of being called non-native electromagnetic field not adversely affect our bodies when we are electromagnetic. And,
Yeah.
what I've observed over the last almost 3 decades is the further someone moves away from their natural environment, the more sick they get,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's interesting, again, if you look at the work of Weston A. Price, when he found native tribes that were living in their natural way,
Yeah.
there was practically zero disease.
Yeah.
People, right? There was no depression, there was no heart disease, there was no cancer, there was no diabetes, there was no dementia.
Yeah.
They were robust, they were strong, they were happy.
Yeah.
Definitely didn't need a dentist. Definitely didn't need a mortgage, right? Uh,
Yeah.
and you can look at it in the other way. The further away you move away from that environment, the more sick you tend to be, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
No, I definitely noticed when I lived in Tokyo, that was probably the biggest major city I've ever lived in. Something psychologically just wasn't the same as it is when I'm back home in my native state of Wisconsin. There's a lot. I mean, there's obviously I live in a city here too, but you can easily get to nature. You can easily get to open
um,
spaces, right? And Tokyo was like one big concrete jungle. I mean, you would have to get on a train and ride it for 45 minutes to an hour to get out of that. And you got used to it the longer you were there. But thinking back, it was like, yeah, there were just days I felt downright depressed and sad and didn't know what was wrong. And you really have to wonder, like, is it this environment I'm constantly in every day, right?
mm, yeah. Again, just to kind of emphasize the point, there's someone on Instagram, and how can I best describe her? She's like a body positivity person for acne, right?
Okay.
So she says, you're still beautiful if you've got acne. There's nothing wrong with acne. It's perfectly normal, etc., etc., right?
Yeah,
That's fine. That's her view. But if acne is perfectly normal, why do people living in their natural environment not have acne?
exactly.
Right? Again, if you go and find a hunter-gatherer tribe now, there are a few still out there, you will not find any of them, and I'm talking about the teenagers as well, you won't find any of them with acne,
Mhm.
right? And it's because they're living in alignment with their natural environment. And you can talk about any animal, right?
Right.
What happens to killer whales when they go out of their captivity, right?
Yeah.
Their fin flips over, doesn't it? Right? That's just one sign that we can see that they're not healthy. Anyway, let's crack on. So, many people might believe that, resolving chronic digestive issues requires extreme restrictive diets that's going to have to do for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
What myths about gut healing do you wish you could dispel? Attention, all radical health rebels. Are you ready to uncover the truth the authorities don't want you to know? We've just launched our Radical Health Rebel channel on Rumble. Here's the deal. We're bringing you the first half of our subscriber-only episodes for free. That's right, free access to the hard-hitting, eye-opening conversations that dig into the topics mainstream platforms won't touch. Whether it's cutting-edge health insights, exposing hidden agendas, or sharing tools to thrive in challenging times, this is your chance to stay informed without subscribing to the podcast. Tune in on Rumble to keep track of what's really going on in the world and join a growing community of truth seekers. Don't miss out. Search Radical Health Rebel on Rumble and start watching today. Because knowledge is power, and it's time to take yours back.
Yeah. So I think just to speak to that extreme diet piece, again, there's such a spectrum of thinking around this. And again, there's a lot of people that have made huge names for themselves doing specific types of extreme diets, right? And I mean, all the way from carnivore to veganism. And, just from the way I was trained, I would argue that we need as many foods in our diet as the body can healthfully tolerate, right? Whole foods, especially. So, again, kind of the simple template that I think makes sense in every situation is if you're eating a real recognizable food, generally speaking, that's good. Now, the reality is with the gut health camp, there definitely are people I've found just in my experience and then my own personal experience living at that to say that they're going to be able to get to a place of being able to eat anything and everything for the rest of their lives if we quote unquote heal their gut is probably not realistic. So, you know, the I guess the real kind of strategy there is to get get to a place where their diet can be as expansive as possible and they find joy in food and they have as much variety as possible, but we're still able to maintain relatively normal, healthy gut function and bowel movements, right? And so the strategy I always take with the majority of clients in the beginning is that, hey, you're coming to me because you're struggling. And the majority of them, honestly, are on a standard American diet, just a standard, mostly processed foods diet. And most of them do recognize deep down that their diet is playing a role and they understand they're going to have to make some changes. And so that process kind of looks like, okay, let's sit down and take a look at what you're actually eating. I'm going to start to lay out some possible changes and suggestions, and let's see what you're open to doing first. And then we start to kind of walk down that path. And so I kind of let them also take the lead in terms of like the client I was mentioning I worked with last fall who was discovering that wheat was her big trigger. You know, she was able to feel like her digestive system was normalizing nicely and she was feeling better energy wise, brain function wise, the whole nine with getting wheat out. And then also what she didn't report, but I could tell by looking at her food journal was her food quality had also improved. Like she wasn't eating as many processed nutrient poor foods. She was actually incorporating some of the better nutrient dense options that I had kind of, introduced her to, or and given her some ideas for, hey, for healthy snacks, like here's some great things that my kids really like. We like in our household, like, if this looks interesting to you, give it a go, And so she had actually made a lot of just like nutrition quality swaps along with getting wheat out. And that landed her nicely in a spot where I could tell she was very happy with, being able to maintain that and she didn't feel ultra restricted. And we talked about, if you take vacations, if you travel from a weed avoidance standpoint, we're going to have to talk about some supports that you can use. And it might take a little, researching where you want to eat in advance and making some choices in advance as to where you're going to have your meals out so that we can minimize those exposures. She was totally okay with that. So, on the other end, some people find that they end up having to remove more foods than wheat. And it really kind of becomes this individual thing where, with every client I work with, we try to find the sweet spot of, where we can get them diet wise to a place where their gut is functioning well, but they also don't feel unusually psychologically stressed or, I would even say psychological stress at all. Like, they might find that at home they're maintaining a certain way of eating that keeps their gut functioning well. And then when they go out with friends and family, whenever that is, once a week, a couple times a month, that they're able to incorporate foods they wouldn't normally eat. They may or may not have a little bit of a setback, but that's okay. That's kind of that sweet spot for them to kind of have the lifestyle and social connections they want and still feel like they've maintained their health gains. So I guess to kind of answer that question, Lee, I would say I don't think that being in a super restricted diet without doing deeper testing on the gut to get to the root of like, are we seeing parasites? Are we seeing bacterial imbalance? Are we seeing digestive dysfunction? Right? Like those things, in my opinion, should also be part of that deeper process of discovery to really figure out, okay, can we correct some of these things so that you're not stuck on this really limited diet in order to maintain good gut function? Because I find if it's that restrictive, that can make it very, very hard for that
Mhm.
person long term to go out and have more of a normal life where they're able to like go out to eat with friends and family or travel and then find places that they can eat reasonably that I suppose if it was a carnivore diet, you could just get a steak, but you know what I mean? It can get very tricky, I think, in the long haul. And then my other concern with something that's that extreme too is, are we setting the body up for nutrient deficiencies and macronutrient
Mhm.
deficiencies that could cause secondary issues like, not having enough carbohydrates, which is often the one that can happen with the gut health camp because these are folks that often are having more sensitivities to carbohydrate types of foods. They'll go in the direction of reducing, eliminating. Then we get to a place where there's not much of those types of foods in the diet. Severely restricting carbohydrates can be a big problem too for the long haul health wise. So That's where I think using like a good stool test in combination with maybe some other testing, if it seems really complex, to get the deeper answers as to like what are these other stressors that are leading to these food sensitivities in the first place that makes sense. Like the
Mhm.
truth of it is, some people are just never going to tolerate wheat or dairy. They have genetic SNPs, we call them, like polymorphisms that
Mm.
make them more likely in the presence of wheat to mount an immune response. And so that is just what it is. And if, we figure this out either experientially or they've done some genetic testing and they discover this, then we have to make that decision about, is this a food we take out lifelong for the greater good of your health and for you being able to maintain higher function, right? And most people I find are willing to do that if they're really health forward people, right? But we've got this other camp where some people get into kind of the DIY, let me figure this out. Now I'm doing carnivore for a year and I feel great, but are you going to feel great 5 years down the road if you're still doing that diet?
Mhm.
So that's kind of the common ends of the camps that I see with the whole restrictive diet piece of it. So yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I kind of look at it, from a practitioner point of view. Is that the more unwell someone is, the more out of balance they are.
Hmm.
Initially, they might need to be a little bit more. I don't like to use the word, but I can't think of a better one right now. Restrictive,
Yes, I
right?
would agree with that. Yeah.
If someone's coming to me and their condition's not as bad, then they can maybe be a little bit more, let's call it flexible,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But beyond that, what what I do, and this is something that we're probably going to talk about on your podcast next week,
Yeah.
is it's setting core values, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can set core values around a number of different subjects, but one of them that's really important, I believe, is around your diet.
Mm-hmm.
So, so for me, my core values around diet is that I only ever buy organic food. I don't ever buy anything that's not organic, unless it's wild fish. I would never buy organic fish because it's farmed. It's not a good idea. Um, I always drink 2 to 3 liters of really good quality water every day. I eat right from a metabolic type, but occasionally I might go out and have an Indian meal or a Thai meal or something along those lines where I'm not sticking to it 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And if the next day I've got some kind of symptomology because of what I've eaten, I'm okay with that,
Yeah.
right? That's within my core values. Now, if I was eating out every week, that would become a problem
Yeah.
for my health. I wouldn't be able that wouldn't do me any good, right?
Right.
I mean, I don't eat out very often, but I think everyone needs to get clear on what their own core values is. And what I say to my clients is there's no such thing as failure, only feedback,
Mhm.
right? So, someone might say to me, "Oh, I went out the other day and I had cake and I had this and I had that." And I look at their diet sheets and yeah, the next morning, they were constipated or they had diarrhea or their skin broke out or they couldn't sleep that night or they had no energy the next day. And they're like,
Mhm.
"Oh, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry." And I'm like, "Look, don't apologize. It's got nothing to do with me, right?
Yeah.
What you've got is some feedback from the foods that you ate.
Mhm.
Now, when we get feedback, that's great because it's an opportunity to learn and grow." So then the next question would be, okay, so when you're in that social situation next time, what do you want to do? Do you want to do the
Mhm.
same thing again and get the same response? And if you do, I'll support that.
Mhm.
Or would you want to do something else? And if you wanted to do something else, how would you do that? Because in social situations there are lots of social pressure, right?
Yes.
Now, I don't do social pressure, right? No one can socially pressurize me into doing anything, right? But I know not everyone's like that. Some people don't like feeling left out or the odd one out or whatever.
Yeah.
But then that now becomes a completely different subject. It's like, okay, so why are you so concerned about what someone else thinks of you? Because that's got nothing to do with you.
Exactly.
That's just their view, right?
Mhm.
So that's another whole can of worms, which I didn't want to don't really want to go down now because maybe we'll talk about that on your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something we've mentioned is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Can you explain why addressing SIBO alone isn't always enough, and what deeper root issues might be driving chronic gut symptoms below the surface?
Yeah. So SIBO is a great, I feel like, trending area in gut health. And I feel like as of the last decade, I mean, I still get a lot of people asking me questions about it. And I mean, it definitely is a real thing. And, I think I mentioned earlier that upwards of 70 to 80% of all IBS has an underlying small intestinal bacterial overgrowth component
Mm,
to it. Now, things I can kind of share with you from my training under Alison Seebecker and her SIBO Pro course, things I didn't realize before I took that course is upwards of, I think, 75% of all autoimmune disease, believe it or not, also has SIBO underlying it. And even things like rheumatoid arthritis, where there may or may not be overt gut symptoms present, still can have SIBO as a component, kind of driving some of that inflammatory dysfunction from the gut
mm,
of it, right? And I've seen client testing where, even from other practitioners, where they've come to work with me and they brought these tests over, and they're like, "Oh, my practitioner had me do a lactulose breath test," and they've got, the client I'm thinking of had RA, and of course it was positive. She's like, "I'm just so stumped. I have no gut symptoms," and I'm like, yeah, that's the interesting thing about that condition. It doesn't necessarily produce overt gut symptoms in everyone, but I think just that statistic where we're seeing enough correlation also in the autoimmune camp does kind of beg the question of, is this by itself a standalone disorder that's just kind of, I guess, developing out of nowhere in the gut, or is it developing secondary to other dysfunctions that are setting the stage for something like SIBO? And so, sort of what I have just found to be true in working within the gut population is when I look at either a stool test, and actually, I don't do a lot of lactulose breath testing either, Lee, simply because I find that there's enough correlation with bacterial imbalances in stool testing that if I'm seeing signs on the stool test that make me suspicious SIBO could be part of it, it's not as relevant that we need to go down that rabbit hole or check that type of information. I have enough from the stool test that I'm pretty confident if we run a protocol to help bring things into balance, that either the potential SIBO that might be there will also, self-correct, or it won't. And I guess what I find is when I'm looking at just signs of bacterial overgrowth in the gut, folks, almost always there's going to be at the same time signs of upper GI weakness. So things like low stomach acid, low enzyme output, or bile quality issues, or not enough bile getting produced. And so all of those things, as you know, right, can set the stage for just poor digestion, larger particles of food making it through the intestines, which will start to become easy substrate then for bacteria to either migrate up. Usually that's where they're coming from, is the colon, migrating up into the small intestine, feeding off of that food, and then kind of having a party and creating inflammation. And the gut people, it's going to show up usually as bloating or constipation or diarrhea, or sometimes even abdominal pain too. And so correcting that upper digestive issue, that digestive weakness or dysfunction that's happening, always should be a piece of trying to actually work on bringing that SIBO issue back into balance for the long haul, right? And the other interesting thing about it, and this was again kind of a factoid I learned in the SIBO Pro course, is that like 2/3 of all SIBO is chronic and recurring as well. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, if it's coming back, assuming you could effectively self-treat using an herbal protocol, or you go see a GI doc and they give you something like rifaximin and it clears it, like what are the circumstances or factors lending to it coming back again, right? And it would make sense that if digestion is weak, that stage that's setting up the environment for that bacteria to overgrow and populate, right? It's just going to get reset again if we're not correcting the digestive dysfunction. So that's a big piece of it. And then there's also this notion that, again, I think this kind of ties into just overall the gut as an environment and how conducive it is to good balance, and having an immune system that's responsive when it needs to be responsive but not overly responsive, right? Like not a over vigilant immune system, which we can
mm,
often see in autoimmune conditions. Just any gut environment that's prone to the growth of more inflammatory strains of bacteria, I find also tends to favor things like SIBO, right? So this is kind of more of that like I was almost going to touch on this earlier because you had said something that made me think of this that pathogen versus terrain type of health theory, right? Where like
Mm.
you can either look at do we go after all these suspicious pathogens and these bad guys we find on testing and just like pound the heck out of them and get them out of there and then this person will get better? Or do we focus on the host themselves, including like what is that person as a whole person doing to facilitate the gut as a whole to function well. Like, and that gets back to some of the foundations again as well. Like, are they sleeping enough? Are they, overly stressed? Are they, getting good social connections? Is their quality of thought, healthy, right? Like they're not beating themselves up internally all the time. Those types of things that are a little bit harder to measure. But I do believe that in cases where we see a lot of SIBO show up, there's more of just that terrain problem that's very conducive to allowing it to kind of like continue to take a stronghold. And it's almost like, I don't know, I think of it as kind of like a bit of a like parasitic type of thing where even though we're talking about bacteria, I mean, it's overgrowth of an organism that's stealing nutrients from the body and essentially going to leach energy. And that's kind of what a parasite does too. And so
Yeah.
I find it fascinating just to think about like, contextually, like are we seeing maybe correlation with the person as a whole and some of the circumstances of their lifestyle that might allow for that type of infection, if you will, to take a stronghold and drain them, right? And so I know this is a little bit more in that mind body connection space I'm sort of coming from, but I think to really get at a problem like SIBO and fully bring it back into balance, it's a lot more than just taking an herbal protocol or a pharmaceutical protocol to clear it and then it's just, goes away for good. Like I rarely see that. So I think if it's there, automatically the question should be like, what are the deeper things that are allowing this to continue to kind of reoccur in the body, even if we're able to effectively eradicate it?
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I did some study with Alison Seebecker quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
And more recently, I did some training with Jason Horolek. I don't know if you
Oh,
know.
sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's, I've done 2 episodes with Jason actually. And the first one we did was on SIBO.
Nice.
And, and that at the moment is the third most downloaded episode that I've done.
I bet.
Um, and I found the training that I did with Jason really helped me help clients with SIBO. But it's going back to the terrain versus germ theory
Yeah.
aspect. That's something that's I've really looked into more in the last 4 years, 5, yeah, 5 years now, since I read Tom Cowan's book Contagion Theory.
Yeah.
Um, and then having read The Final Pandemic by Sam and Mark Bailey, and then I've read Can You Catch a Cold by Daniel Roytas, and even um, the book Dissolving Illusions. And again, I've had Roman Bistrianic on the podcast. It actually doesn't come out until next month, but
Oh,
um, it's really interesting looking at that work and then comparing it to, I guess, what's the current thinking amongst functional medicine. And I'm starting to think it might be slightly different from what we're seeing
yeah.
in terms of, because I still think in functional medicine, there's still a little bit of room for germ theory. And I'm
Mhm.
starting to question whether there is room for germ theory
Yeah.
at all. Because I think and I've thought this for a long time, and I think a lot of people still do, is that there's a gray area
Mhm.
between terrain and germ theory that, if you're healthy, then you won't get an infectious disease.
Yeah.
But actually, when you look at the science, there's no science that actually backs up the evidence of any infectious disease,
So fascinating.
which is quite interesting. So
Yeah.
I need to dig further into this, but I've got some kind of thoughts into my head as to what might be right. But I definitely need to do some more digging.
Yeah. It's very nuanced, and I feel like the way we're trained as FDNPs is to find the hidden stressors in the gut, and I do think there is a part of that. Like I would never discount that. It's definitely a part of my process, but I kind of like you, Lee. Like I haven't dug that deep into the literature as you have, but I've listened to enough of it, especially during the COVID era, that I've really, and also I would also say too, from some of the Chinese medicine training I've done, because I didn't mention this, but I did go through some Chinese herbal training about 8 years ago, and it was fascinating just to learn how that medicine works. I decided not to really get super smart on that and incorporate that into the work I do, but it taught me a lot, and it taught me different ways of looking at health in the body. And I would say there's a lot of just correlation with kind of how Chinese medicine really views. I would say that system really does favor more so the terrain theory. And it's all about getting, basically they talk about chi, or kind of this life force energy that kind of circulates in the system, getting that individual to as robust a state as possible in the attempt of kind of like having the body itself deal with these problems that are presenting, right? And so um I'm starting to question, how much we need to be pounding pathogens, or let's just say, like, it can be hard with a lot of, I think, functional approaches can look like conventional approaches just revamped as supplements instead of drugs, if you know what I mean, right? Like,
Mm,
it's
mm,
very hyper focused on going after all the quote unquote problems in the body, but almost to the exclusion of everything else then, which I would say is really missing the mark, right? Because then we're discounting everything else that makes the body able to function well. And a lot of that is this foundational stuff like sleep, diet, relationships, mindset, all the things you were just mentioning. So,
mm,
yeah.
mm. Yeah, again, I did actually, I have interviewed Dr. Mark Bailey and I've interviewed Daniel Roytas, and we have discussed these topics.
Yeah.
Um, and if anyone wants to listen to those episodes, um, you need to be a subscriber to the podcast to listen to those. Or if you want to watch the first half, you can watch it on my Rumble channel. It's just Radical Health Rebel. But what's quite interesting is that, that group of doctors and scientists, what they're starting to question is, you know, if you've got a parasite, you've got a fungal infection. Well, they wouldn't even call it infection. If you've got a parasite, fungus, a so-called pathogenic bacteria,
Hmm.
are they not there for a particular reason?
Hmm.
Are they there to actually help you? Right.
Hmm.
So, for instance, fungus and parasites, they can actually protect you from heavy metals that are in the system.
Yes.
So, if you then kill them, then you're actually going to release those heavy metals back into your system.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So their kind of view is there's no such thing as infection. There's no such thing as pathogens in terms of microbes,
Hmm.
and there is no evidence that viruses exist either, which is another rabbit hole to go down if anyone wants to go down. But again, I've done 2 episodes on that, and it's a really really interesting subject. But the science just isn't there that they exist, which I know for a lot of people is a bit of a what we would call a melon twister.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I've got one more question for you.
Okay.
So, in your own healing journey, you've discovered how emotional and energetic factors contribute to physical health. How do you integrate that understanding into your work with clients?
Yeah, so that's great. We're kind of touching on this, I think, a little bit with the whole terrain, germ shift theory thing, and I think this would also kind of tread into the area of, okay, what do we do? Say, like, this will come up in my world sometimes in testing with clients when we've done all of the things, right? All of the things that should work theoretically, right? And they've run a protocol, should have theoretically helped support the gut to come into better balance, and say we run a stool test and we're still seeing a lot of the same issues. Now, sometimes it could be something deeper like toxicities or metals or what have you, and some of those organisms are buffering that 100%. But what I've found, and I've actually found this to be true in my own personal gut health journey, is that all energy, and I guess we could say it this way, like, all energy in the body eventually, when it's concentrated in a certain way, will manifest physically, right? And so I know this is kind of like a woo woo area to sort of talk about, but if you look at just how, there's definitely been research done on even different cancer, like people who have gotten cancer repeatedly. And just off the top of my head, I can't think of the different researchers that I've come across and read about in the past, but they've shown that, these certain energetic imprints will continue to show up, and that in cases where these folks with cancer were successfully treated and the cancer was in remission, if the energetic blueprint of the body doesn't change, almost always the cancer would manifest again, right? And
Mm.
so I find that really fascinating. And even
I-
as of,
I've
oh, go
actually
ahead.
had I've actually had someone on my podcast talking about that.
Oh,
So
well, there you go. Perfect. Yeah.
yeah, quite early. I think it's episode 5. I think very early on. So the guy called Paul Inderts, that's kind of what he does. He works on um, the emotional trauma cause
Yeah.
of cancer.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Um, yeah, I've done a couple of episodes with him actually. So yeah, that's definitely a thing. So yeah, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no, 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 absolutely. Well, I'm glad that you've got that on. That would be a great episode for listeners to go listen to, because I found that so fascinating when I came across that. And then I was just going to mention that even as of like the last year, I was introduced via another practitioner to like German new medicine. I don't know if
Mm.
that's something you're familiar with as well, Lee. Have you had?
Yeah, interestingly, Paul Inderts talks about it a lot.
Oh,
Um,
really? Oh, same person. Funny.
well, the reason he talks about it is because, and again, don't want to go too far into this.
Yeah.
He's been accused of kind of doing it, but not doing German new medicine,
Okay.
and so he's kind of rebutted that and said, "No, you're mistaken if you think that's what I do. What I do is different."
Okay.
So
Okay.
anyway, yeah, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, 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 and I don't remember the doctor, but it was a German doctor who had
Mm.
done different studies, let's put that, but like lots of studies on, again, I think it was cancer population of many, many patients, and was able to correlate um, the the different types of cancer and the different organs of the body that were affected with different regions of the brain, and then kind of map out how, from like a almost an evolutionary perspective, like a survival perspective, that there was a stressor or a trauma that there could always that whole manifestation of the physical disease could be traced back to based on the brain's interpretation. And so like the example I remember that I listened to when I was first kind of coming across this was like, say it was like a husband and wife, and the husband got into a fatal car accident, and this is a trauma now for her. Her brain could interpret that event in multiple different ways. And if it was interpreted as like first and foremost, like a loss of security, one region of the brain would get, triggered. And then that could manifest, because of the meaning associated with that, to potentially this type of physical like disease development. If it was more so like an emotional trauma, right? Because they were really close, that would have a different meaning, right? And so there were all these different ways that these different events or traumas that we've been through. And the crazy part of this is it can go back generationally too, right? So this kind of gets into this whole intergenerational theory of disease or trauma, where events that even our great grandparents and beyond have gone through can get encoded in DNA and then
Uh,
transferred down through the generations, and that potential can live, within us as individuals, and under the right circumstances can get activated, and that can be a piece I found. I This is just sort of what I've deduced through my own personal experience with my own illness, and just working with lots of people who have not been easily responsive to a lot of the foundational stuff. Is I almost always come to the conclusion there's a deeper energetic, emotional, or trauma piece, whether it's their, lifetime, they're aware of it or not, or it's something that's been encoded in them, that's been activated, that wasn't resolved in the past,
mhm.
that needs to be worked on and resolved and actualized for their body to physically kind of get to a place where they're able to heal fully, right? And I don't myself personally have like a wonderful tool for that, but this is where, again, having the eye for it and then being able to offer up resources for people to look into, if they feel that intuitively that might be a piece of it, and we have that conversation. But I do feel, just at a very basic level, being able to use somatic tools to try to calm the nervous system Know how to be conscious of when you're getting into a stress state is super, super helpful as part of the process of helping the body heal. And so the system that I'm trained in and uses heart math. And again,
Uh,
it's not a very difficult thing to learn. That's kind of why I like it. It's a tool in the toolbox. Like some clients really love it when I teach them. Is it going to resolve intergenerational trauma? Probably not, but it will definitely start to develop more body awareness and consciousness. And if clients are willing to actually engage and use the tool, they can effectively bring down the stress response pretty quickly doing it. So I feel everybody should have some tool of that type in their toolbox if they're on,
uh,
a path to healing a chronic illness, because I just find time and time again, there's almost always some sort of nervous system dysregulation, stress, trauma, that type of thing going on in the background. And then with that energetic or emotional imbalance as well.
uh, yeah, I completely agree. And again, we were talking before we started recording, and I was saying to you, I do the emotion code.
Yeah.
And then I actually had Dr. Bradley Nelson on the show as well to talk about the emotion code,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool. So when I went through my training, I think it's just over 2 years ago, I finished my training on the emotion code. And I was thinking, how am I going to incorporate that into my current like packages or programs that I offer clients?
Yeah.
And so, thinking I don't really want to put my prices up. How am I going to incorporate it? So I just offer that as part of the package. I didn't put my rates up at all, even though for some people I might be spending twice as much time with them. So I found it a really good add on to my services that I already do. Some people just come and do the emotion code on its own. That's fine, and they just pay per session.
Yeah.
But having incorporated it into my other work, nutrition and lifestyle coaching and functional medicine and exercise and hands-on therapy, yeah, it works really nicely, I would say.
I love that. Yeah, and I'm very curious about that. I've come across it, but I'm not super familiar with it. So yeah,
Mm,
I've heard really good things though, Lee, for sure.
and it does work on generational trauma as well.
Oh, does it? Awesome. Yeah.
Mm.
So well worth that investment in that training for you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah. I thought it was really good.
Mhm.
Yeah, and there's other levels. There's the body code, and you've got the belief. I think it's belief code as well. I haven't done those yet, but
Okay. You just
just using it,
did you
just
do
doing
just
it.
the basic
Yeah,
one then?
yeah.
Basic?
I've just done the emotion code. Yeah,
Yeah. Sweet. Nice.
yeah. I will do the others at some point, but
Yeah.
only 24 hours in a day.
Oh, I know. Too much going on, right? Got a
Yeah,
lot going on.
yeah. And talking about lots going on, what's next for you?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm kinda just doing my thing. So yeah, I mean, I still have my bodywork practice, but I also see nutrition clients, functional health clients, and so continuing to still just, grow that and serve more people, and so I would like to. My hope would be at some point down the road to get into more like maybe group work, and then what would be awesome about that is it would actually like focus on less of the testing. Ironically, right? Even though we're
Mhm.
trained to run testing like that, and I do like doing that, but I think sometimes having a small group container can actually be beneficial for people who are on a similar health path who do need more of that social support as well as the coaching, and then also want to learn from what other people are challenged with or going through. And so that's kind of like the next thing that I want to try to bring into fruition. But like you, Lee, I need time to kind of devote towards developing that resource. So that's down the road. But yeah, for right now, I'm kind of just continuing to do a lot of one-on-one work, and I love that, and I'll never stop doing that. But you can only serve so many people that way too in a
Mm.
given day or week, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Where can people find you online?
So best way is my website, which is just my first and last name, CourtneyCowie.com. If you go there, you'll see actually at the top, I have a free e-guide. So if you're struggling with anything in the IBS-D or IBD realm, it's kind of designed for that chronic diarrhea predominant symptom. So there's a lot of great, just simple starting point tips in there that a lot of people have found to be really helpful. So that's kind of a nice resource I have out there for folks.
Awesome, great stuff. Courtney, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed talking to you today, and thanks for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with the Radical Health Rebel audience. It's been really great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on today. It was a pleasure.
So that's all from Courtney and me for this week. But don't forget to join me same time, same place next week on the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to give the show a rating and a review, and I'll see you next time.